They called her Unteachable, but a quiet cowboy discovered her gift. She was 7 years old the first time someone said it out loud. The word was not shouted, and it was not meant to hurt, but it did. It followed her quietly, like a shadow she could never step away from. The teacher sighed, closed the folder on her desk, and spoke to another adult as if the girl were not sitting right there. "She's unteachable," the woman said, tired more than angry. The girl did not fully understand the word, but she understood the tone. It meant she had failed at something important. The classroom was loud and crowded, filled with children who raised their hands quickly and answered before the question was even finished. The girl sat near the window, twisting the edge of her sleeve, watching dust float in the sunlight. Words on the board looked like tangled lines to her. Numbers moved around when she tried to hold them still. When the teacher spoke, the sounds reached her ears, but meaning slipped away before it could settle. She tried to focus, truly she did, but her mind felt like it was always one step behind or drifting somewhere else entirely. At first, the teachers were patient. They leaned down to her level, repeated instructions, used slower voices, but as months passed, patience grew thin. There were many students and not enough time. She was asked to try harder, then told she wasn't trying at all. Her notebook stayed mostly empty except for careful drawings in the margins: horses, birds, fences, open fields. Those drawings earned her frowns and red marks, not praise. At home, things were not much easier. Her mother worked long hours and came home exhausted. Her father had left years earlier, leaving behind silence and unpaid bills. When school letters arrived, her mother read them quietly at the kitchen table, rubbing her temples. "Why can't you just listen?" she asked one evening, not cruelly, just worn down. The girl had no answer. She only knew that she listened all the time, but somehow it never seemed to be the right way. As she grew older, the gap between her and the other children widened. They learned to read chapter books while she struggled with simple sentences. They solved math problems quickly while she counted on her fingers, ashamed to be seen. Group work became her worst fear. Other kids rolled their eyes when she didn't understand. Some laughed. Others ignored her completely. She learned that staying quiet hurt less than speaking and being wrong. By the time she reached middle school, expectations for her were already low. Teachers no longer pushed her. They placed her in the back of the room and focused on students who showed promise. Meetings were held with counselors who spoke in careful language about limitations and realistic goals. They talked about basic jobs, simple tasks, futures that stayed small and safe. The girl sat there nodding while a strange numb feeling settled in her chest. She began to believe the word they used for her: unteachable. It explained everything: why she felt slow, why learning felt painful, why nothing seemed to fit. She stopped trying in class altogether. She stared out windows, counted ceiling tiles, and waited for bells to ring. School became something to survive, not a place to grow. Outside of school, however, she was different. She loved walking past the edge of town where buildings thinned and dirt roads began. She watched birds lift suddenly into the air, sensed changes in weather before clouds appeared, and noticed small details others missed. Animals seemed drawn to her calm presence. A neighbor's dog that barked at everyone would sit quietly beside her. Horses she saw in distant fields made her stop and stare, her heart steady in a way it never was in a classroom. No one noticed these things. No one asked what she was good at. They only saw what she couldn't do. When she was 13, the school suggested a work assistance program for students who were not academically inclined. The words sounded polite, but the meaning was clear. It was a way to move her out of classrooms and into places where she could be useful without causing trouble. Her mother agreed, relieved that someone had a plan. The girl herself felt a mix of fear and quiet hope. At least it would be something different. The first few placements did not go well. She worked briefly at a small store where instructions came fast and mistakes were not forgiven. She knocked things over, forgot steps, and felt the familiar weight of disappointment return. Then there was a cleaning job at a local office, where she worked alone but felt invisible, like a ghost moving through empty rooms. Each time, the same conclusion followed her back to school. She's not capable, she doesn't learn, she needs constant supervision. The ranch was quiet, not silent, but filled with steady sounds, wind through grass, the soft movement of animals, the distant creak of wood. A man stood near the fence as the bus pulled away. He wore a worn hat and boots covered in dust. He did not smile widely or speak much. He only nodded once, as if acknowledging her presence without judging it. This man was different from the others she had met. He did not ask her many questions. He did not explain her past to her face. He simply pointed to a bucket and showed her how to carry it without spilling. His instructions were slow, simple, and calm. When she hesitated, he waited. When she made a mistake, he fixed it quietly and moved on. For the first time in her life, no one told her she was wrong before she even began. She did not know his name yet, only that he worked with the land and animals and spoke less than anyone she had ever met. He did not seem bothered by silence. He did not rush. And as the girl followed him across the open ground, something inside her shifted, just slightly, like the first crack in a long winter. She still carried the word unteachable inside her, heavy and familiar. But out there, under the open sky, it felt a little less certain. The next morning, she arrived at the ranch earlier than expected. The bus dropped her off just as the sun was lifting itself over the land, painting the fields in soft gold. She stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do, holding her bag close to her chest. At school or any other place, being early usually meant being in the way. Here, no one seemed rushed and no one seemed bothered by her presence. The cowboy was already there. He was repairing a fence, moving slowly, carefully, as if every movement mattered. He noticed her from the corner of his eye but did not stop what he was doing. After a moment he nodded once, not as a greeting exactly, but as a sign that he had seen her. That was enough. She felt oddly relieved. He handed her a pair of gloves that were too big for her hands and pointed toward a pile of wooden posts. "Set those there," he said simply. His voice was low and steady, not loud or sharp. No long explanation followed. No warning about mistakes. Just a task. She picked up the first post. It was heavier than it looked and she nearly dropped it. Her heart jumped, expecting a sigh or an annoyed look. Instead, the cowboy quietly took the other end, helped her steady it, and placed it down with her. Then he stepped back and let her try again. Something inside her relaxed. They worked side by side for most of the morning without much talking. He showed her how to hold tools, how to move without rushing, how to pause and look before acting. He did not repeat himself over and over. If she didn't understand, he showed her again with his hands. If she made a mistake, he did not stop her midway. He waited until she finished, then corrected it calmly. This was new to her. In school, mistakes were stopped quickly and pointed out in front of others. Here, mistakes were part of the process, not something to be ashamed of. She noticed things as she worked. The way the horses moved together, aware of each other without making noise. The way the cowboy watched them, not with control but with respect. He seemed to understand when an animal needed space and when it needed guidance. He did not force them. He waited. During lunch, she sat on a wooden step, eating quietly. The cowboy sat nearby, fixing a piece of equipment. For a long time, neither of them spoke. In the past, silence made her nervous. Silence meant someone was waiting for her to say something smart or useful. Here, silence felt natural, like part of the land itself. After a while, he spoke. "You're good at watching," he said, not looking at her. She froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly. People rarely noticed her, and when they did, it was usually to point out what she was doing wrong. She said nothing, afraid that speaking might break the moment. He continued, still focused on his work. "Most folks don't watch, they rush." She began to anticipate what needed to be done without being told. When the wind changed, she noticed the animals shift. When one horse seemed uneasy, she sensed it before it became obvious. The cowboy noticed too. He never tested her with words or papers. He never asked her to explain herself. He let her show what she could do through action. When she struggled, he adjusted the task instead of blaming her. When she succeeded, he nodded once as if that was the natural outcome. At school, teachers often spoke about her in front of her, using careful words that still hurt. Here, the cowboy spoke to her directly and only when necessary. He treated her like someone capable, not like a problem to be managed. One afternoon, a horse refused to enter the stable. The animal pulled back, nervous and tense. The cowboy tried calmly, then stepped aside. Without thinking, the girl moved closer. She did not touch the horse. She stood still, breathing slowly, letting the animal sense her presence. After a moment, the horse relaxed and walked forward on its own. The cowboy watched closely. He said nothing, but later he handed her the lead rope without explanation. It was a small gesture, but it felt like trust. For the first time in her life, she felt useful in a way that mattered. Days turned into weeks. Her posture changed. She walked with more confidence, her shoulders less hunched. She spoke a little more, though still quietly. The word unteachable did not disappear from her mind, but it began to feel less true, like an old label that no longer fit quite right. The cowboy never asked about her past. He never asked why she was there. In his world, what mattered was what a person did today. That was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he finally asked her a question. "You like it here?" He was teaching her without forcing her to learn, and in doing so, he was helping her discover a part of herself that had been waiting patiently to be seen. And slowly, without lessons or labels, the girl everyone had given up on was beginning to grow. As the weeks passed, the ranch began to feel less like a place she visited and more like a place she belonged. Each morning, she stepped off the bus with a little less fear and a little more purpose. She no longer waited to be told where to stand. She looked around, noticed what needed to be done, and moved toward it naturally. The cowboy noticed this change, though he never pointed it out. He believed that real growth did not need applause. Instead, he slowly added more responsibility to her days. One morning, he showed her how to measure feed portions. He did not explain the numbers in the way teachers once had. He poured the grain, showed her the level it should reach, and handed her the scoop. "Same every time," he said. That was all. At first, she worried she would forget, but her hands remembered, her eyes remembered. Soon, she didn't need to check. The animals responded calmly, trusting that what they were given would be right. That trust made her careful in a way fear never had. She began to understand time in a new way, not through clocks or bells, but through patterns. Morning light meant feeding. Heat meant shade and water. Quiet afternoons meant checking fences. She learned by doing, by repeating, by feeling when something was off. It was learning that made sense to her body, not just her mind. At school, her teachers noticed something had changed. She was still quiet, still struggled with books and tests, but she no longer looked lost. She no longer stared at the floor when spoken to. When asked simple questions, she tried to answer instead of shrinking away. Some teachers assumed the ranch work was just making her tired. Others dismissed it as a temporary improvement. No one connected it to learning. The cowboy did. One afternoon, a storm rolled in faster than expected. The sky darkened and the wind shifted sharply. The girl felt it before she saw it. Her chest tightened slightly, a familiar warning she had learned to trust. She looked toward the far pasture and noticed the horses growing restless. Without waiting for instructions, she walked quickly to the cowboy. "Storm's coming," she said. He studied the sky, then the animals, then her. He nodded once. "Let's move them." The cowboy looked at her, then really looked. "Good call," he said, 2 words, but they landed deep. Later that week, he asked her to help with a new horse, one that had a history of being difficult. Others avoided it, saying it could not be handled easily. The girl felt nervous but also curious. She stood at a distance, watching. The horse's movements were sharp, its eyes alert and uncertain. The cowboy did not push her forward. He stood beside her. "Take your time," he said. She did. She watched the horse breathe, watched how its ears flicked back at sudden sounds. Slowly, she stepped closer, stopping when the animal tensed. She waited. When it relaxed, she moved again. The process took a long time, but she did not rush. She had learned that forcing things only created fear. Eventually, the horse lowered its head. The cowboy said nothing. He didn't need to. Word began to spread quietly among nearby ranchers. They noticed how calm the animals were, how problems were caught early, how the girl seemed to know things without being told. Some asked questions. The cowboy answered simply, "She pays attention." The constant knot of worry she had carried for years began to loosen. She slept better. She laughed sometimes, softly, surprised by the sound of it. She still struggled with words and numbers, but she no longer believed those struggles defined her worth. One evening, as they finished work, she asked the cowboy a question she had never asked anyone before. "Do you think I'm slow?" She still spoke softly, still moved carefully, but there was strength in her quiet now. She understood something important. Learning did not only happen in classrooms, and intelligence did not only show itself on paper. Out on the ranch, under open skies, she was learning every day. And for the first time in her life, she was proud of herself. Change did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, in moments so small that no one would have noticed unless they were watching closely. The girl herself did not wake up one day feeling suddenly different. Instead, she began to notice that things which once confused her now felt familiar. Her hands moved with confidence. Her eyes caught details before her mind had time to doubt them. The ranch had become a place where she understood the language, even though very few words were spoken. One morning, a veterinarian arrived to check on the animals. He moved quickly, talking as he worked, explaining things mostly to the cowboy. The girl stayed nearby, silent as always, but her attention never drifted. She noticed the way one horse shifted its weight slightly, how its breathing sounded uneven. While the others focused on the routine checks, she watched that horse carefully. When the veterinarian moved on, she hesitated, then gently touched the cowboy's sleeve. "That one's not right," she said softly. The cowboy looked where she pointed. At first glance, everything seemed normal. But he trusted her instincts by now. He walked closer, observed longer, and then nodded. The veterinarian was called back. After a closer look, a small problem was found early, something that could have become serious if ignored. The veterinarian glanced at the girl with surprise. "How did you notice that?" he asked kindly. She shrugged, unsure how to explain something that felt natural to her. "It just felt wrong," she said. The man smiled, impressed. "That's a gift." Yet here it was, being named so simply, without doubt or confusion. As time passed, more people began to notice. Neighboring ranchers came by, asking for help with animals that others struggled with. The girl never spoke much during these visits. She did not explain what she did or how she did it. She stood quietly, observed, and moved only when she felt ready. Animals that resisted others seemed to soften around her. They trusted her calm, her patience, her steady presence. Some people asked the cowboy how he trained her. He always gave the same answer: "I didn't." Tests still caused her hands to shake. Reading aloud still filled her with fear. But now something had changed. The words spoken about her no longer entered her heart so easily. When teachers said she would never excel academically, she no longer believed that meant she would never succeed. When counselors spoke about limited paths, she listened politely but did not feel trapped by their ideas. She had seen another way of learning, another way of being valuable. One afternoon, during a meeting about her future, someone asked her what she wanted to do when she grew older. In the past, she would have shrugged or said nothing. This time, she answered quietly but clearly, "I want to work with animals." One person suggested it might be too demanding. Another mentioned her academic record, but she did not shrink back. She stayed still, grounded in the knowledge she had earned through experience. The cowboy supported her in ways he never spoke aloud. He let her take the lead more often. He trusted her judgment. When problems arose, he asked her what she thought before offering his own opinion. That trust shaped her more than praise ever could. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the land in warm colors, she stood beside him, watching the animals settle for the night. "Why did you let me do things on my own?" she asked suddenly. He considered the question. "Because you needed space," he said, "not pressure." It did not demand attention. It required patience, observation, and respect, things she had always carried within her, unnoticed and misunderstood. What others had seen as slowness was actually depth. What they had called distraction was awareness. What they had labeled unteachable was simply a different way of understanding the world. The realization did not make her proud in a loud way. It made her calm. It gave her a quiet confidence that stayed with her even on difficult days. As the season changed, she realized something else. She was no longer afraid of the future. It was still uncertain, still full of challenges, but it was no longer empty. She could imagine herself growing, learning, helping. She could imagine a life built not around fixing what others thought was wrong with her, but around using what was right. The gift had always been there. It had only needed someone patient enough to see it. Time moved forward the way it always does, whether people feel ready or not. The girl grew older, season by season, without any sudden turning point. There was no single moment where everything became easy, but there was steady change, built from patience, trust, and quiet effort. Her last year in school arrived with the same worries she had always known. Tests still felt heavy. Books still took longer than they did for others. Some teachers still spoke to her with careful voices, as if expecting little. But now those things no longer shaped how she saw herself. She had another place where she was capable, respected, and needed. That knowledge gave her strength. When school finally ended, many people around her worried about what would come next. Forms were filled out. Meetings were held. Suggestions were made that focused on safety rather than growth. She listened, nodded, and thanked them. But in her heart, she already knew her path would not look like theirs. The cowboy offered her steady work at the ranch. There was no dramatic speech, no contract placed on a table. He simply said, "If you want to stay, there's work." She woke early, worked until her muscles were tired, and rested with a sense of purpose. She learned more each year, not through books but through experience. She learned how to recognize illness before it showed clearly, how to calm fear without force, how to listen to what could not be said out loud. Other people began to seek her out. Some were young like she once was, unsure of themselves and labeled as difficult or slow. Others were adults who felt disconnected from the fast world around them. She never tried to teach them in a formal way. She simply worked alongside them, the way the cowboy once had with her. She gave them space. Years later, she understood something important. The cowboy had not changed her by fixing her. He had changed her by believing she did not need fixing. He grew older too. His movements slowed. He spoke even less than before. One winter, he fell ill and could no longer work the way he once had. She stepped into the role naturally, not because she was asked, but because it needed to be done. The ranch continued to run smoothly under her care. When he recovered enough to sit outside again, he watched her from a distance, calm and satisfied. "You did good," he said one afternoon. She smiled, a real smile, no longer surprised by pride. Word spread beyond the nearby land. People spoke about the woman who understood animals, who helped without judgment, who had a way of seeing what others missed. Some asked about her schooling, curious how she had learned so much. She always answered simply, "I learned by doing." She was quiet, unsure, and carried the same look the woman recognized immediately. The look of someone who had been told too many times that they were not enough. The woman did not rush her. She handed her simple tasks. She waited. She watched. And slowly she saw the same change begin to form, the small lift of the shoulders, the careful confidence, the relief of being allowed to learn in one's own way. The cycle continued. The world did not change overnight. Classrooms remained crowded. Systems remained rigid. Labels were still given too easily. But in one quiet corner of the land, something different existed. A place where learning did not have a single shape, where silence was not weakness, where value was not measured by speed or words. Looking back, the woman understood how close she had come to disappearing into expectations set by others. how easily her life could have stayed small if no one had paused long enough to see her clearly. The cowboy never asked for recognition. He never told his story. He simply lived the way he always had, slow, steady, observant. And through that he changed a life. When people asked the woman how she became who she was, she never spoke about being saved or transformed. She spoke about being seen. And that, she knew, was the most powerful lesson of all.